Hey, I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm an online sculpting instructor, and in this video we're going to be talking about some of the differences between polymer clay and plasticine clay, and when to use one or the other. Polymer clay and plasticine clay can look very similar, but they have really distinct properties and they're used for different scenarios. Both of these clays are really common sculpting materials, so let's start off by talking about polymer clay. Polymer clay is a type of oven hardening art clay. It's made from PVC or vinyl, plasticizer, pigments, some oils, and fillers like kaolin. You can find this clay in all sorts of different colors. This type that I have right now is kind of like a granite effect. So it has a light gray clay and then little speckles inside of it. This is just a cheap polymer clay. The brand is Sculpting, and I've used this particular clay for several commissioned sculptures. You can mix different colors and different types of polymer clays. There's glues and things that you can put in between, and you can get some really cool effects using polymer clay, similar to effects that you might see in stone or other materials. When you first open up some polymer clay, it usually needs to be worked a little bit. You can either work it by hand by squishing it, or you can get a roller. For people that use polymer clay a lot, I've often seen them use a pasta roller, where they put in pieces of polymer clay and then compress it between two rolling pins. And that helps it become nice and soft and malleable. One of the major advantages of this type of clay is that you can bake it in a normal oven. The baking temperature is usually between 265 and 275 degrees Fahrenheit, or 129 degrees Celsius to 135 degrees Celsius. The instructions usually say to bake it for 15 minutes for every quarter inch. So the thicker the clay is, the longer you'll have to bake it. Another nice thing is that polymer clay doesn't shrink or change colors when it's cured. It's pretty strong and durable once it's baked, and so you see it used a lot of time in jewelry, or making figurines or ornaments or miniatures and other decorative items. So I like this clay because it's easy to work with, it's easy to sculpt, it comes in a wide range of colors, it can be mixed with other materials. So I like making wire armatures. The nice thing about polymer clay is you can then add aluminum foil onto these wire armatures to build up the primary forms of the body, the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis, and to add some thickness into the limbs. Then you can add polymer clay on top of this and then bake the entire thing in the oven. You don't have to remove the armature or anything like that. And you have a finished sculpture that's ready to be painted or sanded. And what I usually do is just leave it in the original color of the clay. You can also mix it with other materials like glass, wood, and resin, so you can make an armature out of wood or out of paper or many other materials. Then it can be sanded, drilled, varnished, carved, painted after you've baked it in an oven. Some of the disadvantages of polymer clay is that it is more expensive, so you can expect to spend like $10 to $12 per pound of polymer clay, whereas plasticine clay is much cheaper. It's usually like 1/2 to 1/4 of the price per pound of clay. The clay itself can become brittle and dry out if it's exposed to air for a long amount of time. It can release harmful fumes if you bake it above the recommended temperatures. If you like this type of content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's talk about plasticine clay. This clay is also called plastiline or non-tri-modeling clay or oil-based clay. They're all different names for the same thing, and it's this type of clay that I have here. Plasticine clay is usually made out of a natural type of clay medium like calcium salts, but then instead of mixing the clay body with water, it's mixed with petroleum jelly or oils or wax, and it typically has some pigment added for coloring. This one can also come in a variety of colors. In fact, this particular clay that I have that I use all the time, I got from Dollar Tree. It came in a series of 12 different colors, and then I took out the 4 darkest colors and mixed everything else together, and that gave me this nice brown color. I prefer for all of the clay to be one consistent color. It helps you to see the forms better. If you mix all of the colors together from this dollar store clay, it comes out as a kind of nice charcoal, but it's a little bit too dark for me, especially because I like recording with a black background. So to see it a little bit better, I'm using this brown. I also really like Chavant Medium NSP clay. NSP stands for non-sulfurated plasticine. And so it's wax and oil based, but it doesn't have any sulfur. Some of the older clays, they would put sulfur in it and it makes the clay smell pretty bad. And then when you melt the clay down, the sulfur separates, and so it's just kind of difficult to work with. So I prefer non-sulfurated plasticines or non-dry modeling clays. The nice thing about these clays is you can melt them down, you can mix them together. I even mixed in a little bit of hard clay in with the medium clay. The Chavant NSP hard is really hard. It's like a wax. And so if you bake this clay, instead of like polymer clay where it will harden, this clay will just melt into wet wax clay mixture. Non-dry modeling clay is pretty popular among animators because it doesn't dry out. So you can move the clay a little bit and then take a picture. And this is what claymation usually uses. With this type of clay, if I'm doing a figure sculpture, I also will usually have an aluminum wire armature. If you're interested in my method, my favorite method for building aluminum wire armatures, there's a link down in the description below. So some of the advantages are that it's permanently malleable. This clay won't dry out, so you can use it again and again. It's usually smooth and not too sticky. There's many different types, so there's firmer clays and softer clays. This clay from the Dollar Tree is a pretty soft clay, but I really like it. I actually like it better than some of the professional clays that I've used because it's a little bit less oily. If you're making a larger sculpture, you want a softer clay to be able to move it around faster. And the smaller you go, the harder you want the clay to be so that it can maintain the details without getting messed up if you just touch it in different areas. And then the disadvantage of this clay is that it can't be baked to harden. So if you want to make it permanent, you have to go through the process, which can be complicated, of making a mold and then casting it in another material like plaster or resin. So the nice thing about that is if you make the mold, you can make several copies of the sculpture, but mold making is a complicated process in and of itself. That's why I've used polymer clay so many times for commissioned sculptures, because then I don't have to go through the process of making a mold and casting it. I can just bake it in the oven, and then they have a finished sculpture in a plastic-like material. If you don't store this clay correctly, or if you have it in an area where there's a lot of dust, it can pick up all of that dust or hair or other things. So what I usually recommend to students is if you're doing a sculpture that you know you want to keep once it's finished, then I would use polymer clay so that you can bake it in a normal oven. And then if you just want a clay that's reusable that you can practice with, then I usually recommend students get some non-dry modeling clay or plasticine clay, because you can use it over and over again. It won't dry out. And then if you do have something that you want to keep or you want to sell, you can go through the process of learning how to make a mold and cast it in another material, and then you're able to get several versions of that same sculpture. Both of these clays have their pros and cons. If you have questions or comments, please leave those down below. If you'd like to see another comparison video, or if you have an idea for another video that you'd like me to cover in the near future, let me know that as well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. As always, stay creative, stay productive, and I'll see you in the next video.